10 Redditors answer, what's the most real paranormal story you know?
My mom moved us into a new home. She was in the living room trying to hook the cable up, and I was in her room roughly 10 feet away. She kept asking me to turn the TV on to see if it connected, but every time I turned it on, it was loud static. When I turned the TV off after another unsuccessful attempt, there was a large solid black human-like figure standing behind me in the reflection of the TV. I was facing the only entrance and I was 100% alone in that room. It was the middle of the day, but all our curtains were closed so it wasn't a reflection from outside. I ran like hell, and when I told my mom, she didn't believe me. My brother and I consistently had experiences over the many years we lived there. Every single night you would hear and feel someone running back and forth down the hallway. My brother and I were across the hall from each other, but we were on the opposite side of the house from my mom behind a closed door with our only pet, a dog. So many nights we'd both look out our doors at the same time to see if it was the other person, but nothing. We learned to live with it as it never stopped. Another time in broad daylight, I watched my dog walk into a room we used as storage in the same hallway. I laughed and went down the hall to get him out, saying something like, "Silly boy, you can't go in there." But when I turned into the room, it was empty. I was super weirded out because I watched my entire dog walk in. When I got back down the hallway, I then see my dog through our glass door fast asleep on the patio. There was no exit point from that room except a window that wouldn't really open, so it stayed closed and locked. I have so many other stories, but when my brother and I moved out, my mom finally agreed the house was haunted. She woke up in her room to a dark human-like figure standing over her. When she turned the lamp on her nightstand on, it was gone. My childhood home did not just have my grandma, my dog, and I living in it. There were 3 other beings in the house. One was an old man who has died in my house about 40 years earlier. Me and my grandma would hear him walking around, sometimes in steel-toe boots, and one time he actually started playing country music from the 50s on a laptop that was closed and powered off. He only ever showed himself a couple of times, but never around me or my grandma, only to an aunt who had been staying in the basement. She one day asked if we had ever seen anything in the house, then told us she had seen an old man peek out at her from our laundry room. Apparently he didn't look like he was evil, just kind of looking around to see who was there. There was a spirit that never really showed itself or said anything, but it would move things to weird places, throw things across rooms, lock doors, and would also slam doors. One day my dog was outside, but I heard something downstairs. Completely forgetting my dog was outside, I called down the stairs as I was worried he was getting into something as per usual. As I called down the stairs into the pitch-black basement, I heard a crystal clear low growl and kind of just ushered the dog to come upstairs by calling his name. He never came up. I was just going to go downstairs when I heard my dog howling in the front yard. No one was home, no TV was on, nothing. Safe to say I waited outside with my dog for my grandma to get home from work that day. Another one was a little girl. No one could ever see her, but me. She only ever showed herself a couple of times though. Once when I was really young, she appeared behind my door, which was wide open. She was kneeling down crying really hard. Of course I freaked out, and when my grandma came rushing in, she was no longer there. Another time, she showed herself when I was in sleep paralysis. This time I could only slowly move my eyes, which led to me seeing her knelt down in the corner of my room crying. She once sent a picture from my phone of her white forehead and black hair, At the time I had blonde hair and had not sent any picture of my forehead, and no one was home or had access to my social media. Sometimes, me and my grandmother would hear her crying around the house, or she would throw some things. I had a feeling she was traumatized and died at a young age due to the way she had literally brought sadness into a room. I'm tearing up just thinking about it. I had also endured my fair amount of trauma in the home, so sometimes I felt connected to her, but almost too connected for my personal comfort. I began feeling the sadness she brought with her, and I think I may have gotten an attachment from it. I am of Aboriginal descent, and one day my grandmother decided she wanted to smudge my room because activity had gotten super bad in there and it was always at least 7 degrees colder than the rest of the home. She immediately felt a coldness in the corner and asked if that's where the little girl had been crying, and she was right. As she was smudging, I started to cry very abruptly and hard. I was nearly sobbing. My grandma had to stop smudging, then told me that the girl most likely had an attachment to me and I shouldn't have cried because in our culture and beliefs that means that you are inviting them to stay with you. My grandma died a couple of years later and I moved out of the home, but I still sometimes feel like she is with me. When I was around 18 or 19 and still living at home, I worked a late shift in a bar. One Saturday night, I got home around 1 a.m. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth when I heard a sharp knock on the door, followed by a male voice telling me to hurry up in there. I just assumed it was my brother putting on a silly deep voice, so I told him to F off. I'm coming out of the bathroom and that's when it hits me, there's no one in the house. My parents were up north at some music festival and my brother was out drinking with his friends. My brother came home a couple of hours later to me in the living room watching Arrested Development, hugging the dog and trying not to have a complete breakdown. It's not that exciting a story, but unless I was having some kind of auditory hallucination or temporary bout of psychosis, it's proof enough for me. My mom never liked the house either, always got the feeling something was watching her at the top landing of the stairs, which just happens to be right where the bathroom is situated. I've had a few paranormal experiences, but 2 in particular stand out. First one was when I was a child in the 70s. One evening, my parents had friends and some of our relatives over. They occasionally played with tarot cards and Ouija boards at these little parties. Nothing intense, no candles or anything. Mom said, whatever the Ouija board said usually didn't make sense, like the spirit that they talked to more than once that claimed to have been a Viking and was an ancestor of my mom. We didn't have Viking ancestors, so it was never taken seriously whatsoever. Well, I guess one night, whatever they talked to was something dark. It made Mom uncomfortable and they all stopped playing. 2 days later the Ouija board caught on fire. Just the Ouija board. And that's why Ouija boards became forbidden in our household. Oh, and last year, we did indeed discover we had some Viking ancestors while doing our genealogy. Second story was in the 90s. I worked in a Toys R Us that everyone said was haunted. We couldn't hardly keep an overnight crew because of it. We were doing a bit of a remodel and I was put in charge of an overnight crew of about 12 people. In about 2 weeks, all but 2 had quit. So one night, it's me and one of the 2 that hadn't quit. The other one had called in sick or had the day off or something. So it was just me and her locked in overnight. All night it was super uneventful. We go to take our lunch break and we're sitting there at the table in the break room eating. Suddenly, a penny falls between us. Then, a second one. Then, a third. Now at the time I had a coworker who was something of a prankster. So I looked up expecting to see that he or someone else had wedged pennies into the ceiling tiles. Nope. No pennies. Then, another one falls, and a few more. It freaking started raining pennies. We ran out of there and listened at the door. A little while after it got quiet in there, we went back in and pennies were everywhere. All over the table, the floor, the couch. She quit on the spot. I still have a jar with all those pennies. It was almost $3 worth of pennies. So when I was around 8 years old, I moved into an apartment with my mom and brother. We were on the 3rd floor. My mom and brother weren't the nicest people in the world, so I was already very sensitive to the mood of environments around me. Immediately, walking into this apartment for the first time, I knew something was off. I figured it was me being nervous about a new place and thought nothing of it. We lived there for 4 years, and in those 4 years I noticed a horrible rotting smell. Like a decomposing animal smell. We checked out the attic and found nothing. Had maintenance check it out and also found absolutely nothing. And the smell continued going away and coming back randomly. Our bathroom doors would sometimes sound like someone banging one them randomly, despite no one being in the bathroom or even near the door. I also had a Nintendo 3DS at the time, and I took a picture one night randomly, messing with the camera. It was a picture of a blue phantom figure staring right back into the camera at me, and I was absolutely terrified and didn't sleep well for days after that. Another time, I was watching the show 16 in my room alone, and I heard a man's laugh right next to my ear, as if someone was laughing in my ear. Changed the channel and still heard it, but only louder, and I could almost feel someone's breath in my ear as they did it. And there's many other stories. However, the absolute last straw for me and my family was when we were all watching TV one night in the living room. All of our doors were shut at the same time, and we heard one of the doors open, then the sound of someone running down the hallway stopping right in the living room. After that, we got a hotel and broke our lease because it was terrifying. We did some digging after and found out a man had apparently beaten his wife to death in that apartment, and then unalived himself a few days later. The apartment complex failed to mention this to us, among other shady things, but that's a different story. I'm 20 now and a lot of it still scares me to think about. The most compelling paranormal experience I've ever had was when my older sister had visions of the future. 3 of us sisters were playing in the kitchen, while my dad was away hunting. My older sister screamed suddenly, staring in shock. Younger sis and I asked what was wrong. She said she saw a massive whitish column moving toward her. Not like an apparition. She had a vivid peripheral hallucination, the way many often do. But this one was uniquely powerful. We kept playing. 10 minutes later, she screamed again. This time, she thought our dad had entered the room, wearing an oddly greenish shirt. It was weird, and we made a point to cherish the spookiness of this evening. The next day, our dad was still away. My sisters were poking around in an old closet, and found a large white sack. It was unusually large, maybe 9 to 10 feet long, made of a tight hamper-like netting, and shaped like a sleeping bag. It was so bizarre, it spurred my younger sister to climb inside it, and chase older sis around the house. They found me in the kitchen, where younger sis lunged toward both of us, still wearing the sack. We instantly noticed it was precisely the positioning of yesterday's hallucination, mysterious massive lunging white column, in the same damn place. We lost our shit. We were already superstitious by the time our dad got home. When he walked in the room wearing an oddly greenish tee, we couldn't help but chuckle to each other. It was extremely strange, and served to fuel some pretty unhealthy delusions we were experiencing at the time. But those coincidences were so intense, I will never forget. Me and my friend were in Scouts, camping. Around 16 years old. The site we went to had the old army-style tent. Looks like a mini lodge with a short pole on each corner and two long ones in the center to give it a house look. We had a tent to ourselves after putting it up. We chose a platform away from most of the group as we were older by a couple of years. It was on a hill, and you could stand under the far edge of the foundation. It was a steep hill that you would have to climb up and come in from just one side. Going to sleep one night, someone kicks the far end of my cot. But I was looking at it at the time and no, I didn't see the canvas touch the cot, so it wouldn't have been someone kicking the side of the tent into my cot. Weird. Happens again a few minutes later. Think it's strange. We both go to bed. I wake up soaked. It had been raining that night, and my feet are dirty and I'm tired. My buddy starts telling me of a dream he had. In this dream, he woke up, ran out of the tent down the hill to Sam's tent and asked him where Darman's at. Darman, that's me. In the dream, Sam pointed towards our tent, but my buddy ran towards the bathroom. That was his whole dream. Not a minute later, Sam comes to our tent and hands me my hat, saying you left this at my tent last night. I didn't go to his tent. He retells the whole dream my buddy had, but saying it was me that did it, not my buddy. Even saying that I, Darman, asked where's Darman. Mind you, my buddy and I look nothing alike. He easily had 100 pounds on me and I was blonde, while he had brown hair. We believe we had some weird body swap thing. When I was 13 years old, I experienced the ghost of my grandmother. She died in her sleep, while taking a nap on the living room couch. Afterwards, according to my father and grandfather, every now and then, they could hear her make the trip from the bedroom to the kitchen and open the refrigerator door. A trip she made many times when she was alive. At first, I thought my father and grandfather were making this up, having fun at my expense. A couple of years after she passed away, my father and I went to spend the weekend with my grandfather. We slept on the living room couch. It opened into a double bed. Actually, it is the same couch my grandmother died on. My grandfather left the house to go to a next-door neighbor's house to play poker. My father and I went to bed in the living room. He went right to sleep. I laid awake, reading a magazine. After a while I heard the noise of the back bedroom door being pulled open. I heard the sound of shuffling feet. I heard the creak in the floor directly in front of the bathroom doorway. I heard more shuffling feet. Then I heard the fridge door being pulled open and I heard the sound of glass bottles in the fridge door clinking against each other. Back then, they were still putting soft drinks in glass bottles. Feeling thirsty, I decide to get out of bed and go join my grandfather in the kitchen for a cold drink. I go into the kitchen only to find myself all alone. I was puzzled. I could have sworn I heard my grandfather walk from the bedroom into the kitchen and open the fridge. Then, I remembered that my grandfather wasn't home. He was over the neighbor's house and he hadn't come back yet. Then, I remembered my grandfather's and father's ghost stories. I got scared. I raced from the kitchen into the living room, and leapt over my sleeping father into my side of the bed. Then I went to sleep. I don't know how long I slept before I woke up with a feeling of paralyzing fear in my body. I was frozen. I was lying on my right side, It took a while for me to work up the courage to turn my head to the left. My head was covered by my blanket. There was a shadow being cast onto my blanket. The shadow was the outline of a head and shoulders of a woman with a beehive hairdo. My grandmother used to always have a beehive hairdo even years after it went out of style, up until she died. I heard heavy breathing coming from the shadow. I had to work up the courage to move one of my hands to remove the blanket off of my face. When I did, in an instant, the paralyzing fear I felt was gone. The shadow was gone. The sound of heavy breathing was gone. My father was still sleeping. I pulled the blanket back over my head and went back to sleep. Only to wake up again on my right side. The paralyzing fear was back, forcing myself to turn my head. The shadow was back. The heavy breathing was back. Again, I had to summon up all my courage to move my hand to take my blanket off my face, only to find nothing there and the paralyzing fear gone. I went through this same routine the entire night. I lost count of how many times this happened through the night. Maybe a dozen. Maybe more. But it happened a lot. The next morning, I told my father what happened to me throughout the entire night while he slept. The sounds of the bedroom door opening. The shuffling feet. The fridge door opening. Nobody in the kitchen. Being awakened with a paralyzing fear. The shadow. The heavy breathing. The repeat performances throughout the night. I kind of expected him to tell me that I was just seeing and hearing things. But instead, he smiled and exclaimed, "That was Grandma." I know this is real because it happened to me at Zach Baggins's Haunted Museum in Las Vegas. My fiancée and I went to the Haunted Museum last year. Ghost Adventures is a big foundation for our relationship and we were super excited. It was honestly creepy and outright terrifying in certain areas. One area in particular is a room with the actual chair from Ed and Lorraine Warren's case of a boy getting exorcised. I believe it's the Conjuring movie called The Devil Made Me Do It or something. The tour guide played actual recordings of the exorcism over the speakers, and while it was playing, I had my first real experience. I was standing kind of sideways with my left arm behind me. The person behind me was about 10 feet away. Out of nowhere, I felt what can only be described as a ball pass into and through my left hand. I even had the natural reaction of flexing my hand to catch the ball before I realized what was happening. It felt cold. And I immediately turned around and no one was paying any attention to me. The lady behind me was standing absolutely still and just listening to the recordings like everyone else. It was creepy, but also super awesome at the same time. When I was a teenager, my dad taught me about something called witching the baby. And about witching in general. It's a knack that some people have. You either have it or you don't, you can't learn it. It seems to run in families, because he, my brother, and myself can do it. The basic idea is that you take a golden ring, hang it from a piece of string and hold it over a pregnant woman's stomach, and the ring will start to swing. If it swings in a circle, it's a girl. If it swings in a line, it's a boy. You can also hold the ring over a woman's wrist to find out the gender of the children she's had in the past, or above a person's head to tell what gender they are. Now, it's just a folk suspicion, right? My dad learned it from his mum, who grew up in the Hebrides in Scotland, and it's exactly the kind of hedge magic you'd get people believing in over time based on confirmation bias. Thing is, I've personally seen cases of it working defiance of outside factors. I told one of my teachers about it in high school, and she asked me to demonstrate. So I did it on her, using the over-the-wrist version. It came out completely accurate. Swung in a line a couple of times, then stopped, then swung in a circle, then stopped. She'd had a boy first, and then a girl. She had a photo of her kids on her desk, so I knew she had two. But I'd never looked close at it, so at the time I had thought that both kids were boys. So it couldn't have been me unconsciously influencing the witching. I had been wrong, but the witching had been right. Now, end of the day, it could have been any number of things. I still don't really believe in it. But at the same time, there's a little part of me.
If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Hope to see you soon for a new compilation of scary and uncanny stories.